leave a like and subscribe.
Tom Dryburgh was a senior Labour MP, member of the National Executive, former chairman of the party, and a voracious homosexual. If Dryburgh's relationship with the Krays' right-hand man had got out, the Labour Party would have been embroiled in its own sensational scandal.
Dryburgh, because of his sexual activities, could be preyed upon, and so he was always seen to be a person that would do the Krays some kind of favour through the efforts of Smith.
Dryburgh had several criminal lovers, for whom he did some extraordinary favours. One was a partner in crime and friend of 1960s robber Norman Parker.
My friend got Dryburgh to tell him about an antique dealer friend of Dryburgh's, with a view to us going and robbing him. And that is in fact what we did. I mean, Dryburgh told us where he lived, what time he'd be in, we could catch him in, what sort of antiques that were there. We went along on the evening in question, we forced our way in, we tied the chap up, we robbed the place for about £20,000 worth of antiques and came away with them.
Would Dryburgh have expected to see any of that money?
According to my friend, he did expect to see some of the money, and according to my friend, he was given some of the money.
Albert Donahue became a soldier at Fort Valence, the nickname for the Krays family home at number 178. Like much of the East End, it's now been demolished, but even in its notorious heyday, it hardly resembled the fortress of Ronnie's fantasies. Here, he and his brother held court and presided over the firm's board meetings. From the front room of the 2 Up, 2 Down, they ran a criminal empire. The first time he set eyes on Ronnie, it was obvious to the policeman who was eventually to jail the twins that he was playing the part of an American gangster. It was a summer's evening, and I realised that a car had drawn up immediately outside the door and looked outside. It's a big American-type car, and a guy stepped out of the car, put with his hand in his pocket, as though he had a gun in his pocket, and he sort of swept the street, looking up and down and making sure that there was no one in sight, and then gave a signal, and the back door opened, and out stepped Ronnie Kray. And I was amazed because he was dressed for all the world like a 1930s Chicago gangster. He had a long, long cashmere coat that reached to his ankles, tied in a loose belt at the waist. His hair was greased and parted, and he wore his glasses, and then he swept across the pavement and into the pub, and he looked to me like Al Capone without his fedora.
in 1984, when Charles Richardson was released from his 25-year sentence, for which he served 19 years, he said to me in his office one day in New Cross, "Why did you pop down to Broadmoor to see the Mad Hatter? I understand that Roger Daltrey's blanked them on more dough for their film. See if we can walk in on it."
To help persuade Ron, Eddie Jones took fellow gang member Mad Frank Fraser and the actor Stephen Burkoff, who was to play George Cornell, on the visit.
So one spring morn, Frank Fraser, Stephen Burkoff and myself popped down to Broadmoor. Stephen Burkoff was absolutely rigid with fear, I think, at this time. First question Ron said to me was, "Well, why doesn't Charlie come to see me? Charlie Richardson." Well, I said, "It's very difficult, Ron," I said, "for him to come and see you, isn't it? You know, you shot George Cornell. Frank, you know, who worked for Charlie, he was a good friend of Charlie's. Olive, George Cornell's wife, is still around in Peckham. What's he going to tell her if he bumps into her? Oh, I went down to see Ron last week, Ron Kray. I mean, he can't do it, can he? Let's be honest." To which Ron Kray replied, "Well, it's nothing personal, you see, in those days. What you've got to realise is, I thought George Cornell, but it wasn't personal." And Frank Fraser gave a classic reply to that. He said, "Well, in my book, Ron," he said, "shooting a man in the head and killing him," he said, "and blowing his brains over the bar of a pub is the most personal thing you can ever do to anyone. It's the most personal thing I've ever heard of." Somebody told me that Reggie Kray sends letters out of prison with a photograph as he used to be, not as he is, because he lives in the past. Now, my argument is not that he lives in the past, is that nobody will let him live in the future. Nobody will let him live right now. No, I don't think society knows Reggie Kray. I think they've been presented with a TV dinner. That's Reggie Kray. There's nothing else to him. They've seen the books, they've seen the films, but they were all made by other people. They know nothing. They assume. And that's what he has to live with on a daily basis. It's where I had to live. And I look along this landing and I think about the hundreds, thousands that have gone behind the door of each cell. And how many people have been really rehabilitated? Not many. There was no rehabilitation for someone like me, as there really is no rehabilitation for somebody like Reggie Kray. Because we don't need it. It's non-existent. It's just a word in prison. We rehabilitate ourselves. We come to the conclusion of who we are and what we are and what's acceptable and what's decent, right and proper. I'd seen the absolute worst of human nature. I mean, I had messed up so many people's lives. Eventually it got to the stage where I couldn't wait to get back to the cell. That was the love affair, and I could shut the door and I could look out the sky. I'd seen nothing of nature for years, but here I could watch the starlings, and it never failed to amaze me about starlings. They could never be satisfied. The mother and father would run off and get them food, bring it back, bring them back, and they forever had an open mouth. I watched robins and sparrows having dust baths, things I didn't know birds did. And I began to open up, and I began to look at nature in itself, and I saw that things died and things regenerated. I watched a tree, you know, in the summer, beautiful green, and the flowers came up, and in the autumn the leaves began to drop and they died and they went to nowhere. Where were the things of beauty? But I had to wait for another season for them to come back. And I found that in my own life. As I've lost things, maybe for a short span of time, maybe a long span of time, but they have come back. The beauty has come back. It's about now and the few years that remain. There's always time for turning and getting back something of what you lost.
Judge Milford Stevenson said, you'll go away for at least 30 years. He didn't say he was going to come out after he'd done 30 years, Reggie Kray or Ronnie Kray, right? Right? And he's still in there, and that's where he should be. He's an animal, and they lock wild animals up and fuck him.
You look forward to the next parole review when you may have some idea of how things may change. The authorities have made it very clear that the very best they will offer him will be a move to a D category prison. And so we have that wait until the next parole review, and then even if he gets a D category prison, we have whatever amount of time he will have to spend there, which could be anything 2 to 3 years. I can't imagine any real and true reason why Reg could be turned down this time. And if he is, I would be astonished.
Why is Reggie Kray still in jail? The answers seem to me to be as follows. 1, no reason at all. It's just the usual inertia, cock up, no one can quite work out how to get him out. 2, he hasn't gone through his proper remorse program. He hasn't said the right things to people and thus isn't psychologically able to get out. 3, he's a risk to the public because he's still perhaps a criminal, possibly got some sort of psychological problems. I can certainly exclude that. 4, that there's a sense in which he is an example of villainy, and thus keeping him behind the bars is a signal and a warning to all potential junior Krays coming out of the system. 5, it's some kind of concern or conspiracy about keeping him there because when he's there he won't say things that he might say outside of jail, i.e. he knows something that the establishment wants to cover up. I don't believe that, but the more they keep him behind bars, unnecessarily in my view, the more people will start thinking along those lines.
If you enjoyed the video, please join our Facebook group. It's called Krays Crime Lords of London. We're a friendly moderated group with over 1,000 Kray and other celebrated gangster videos available for view. There's also thousands of images in the photos sections. The link for the group is in the YouTube description section. I